it.
That's what I'm talking about.
Wait.
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to Advancement Amplify, the IA MarCom Shift, a new 5-part pulse check series from Enrollify. I'm Dan Giroux, a higher education marketing communications leader focused on elevating the strategic impact of advancement teams. In this follow-up to Advancement Amplify AI for IA, we're zooming out to explore how advancement marketing communications teams can evolve from reactive, service-oriented roles into more strategic drivers of engagement and philanthropic growth. Through candid conversations with senior practitioners, consultants, and thought leaders, we'll unpack topics like organizational structure, smarter success measures, advanced technology integration, and in-house campaign storytelling amid heightened financial scrutiny and growing pressure to deliver meaningful ROI. Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back. Whether you've listened since episode 1 or you're just dropping in, this one stands on its own. Today, we're doing something different. We're co-leading this session with someone many of you already know well, Jaime Hunt, founder of Solve Higher Ed, host of Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, which has over 85 episodes, and most recently, author of Heart Over Hype, Transforming Higher Ed Marketing with Empathy. I've been really fortunate to get to know Jaime over the past year since the AMA Symposium in Las Vegas. In fact, I even had an opportunity to participate in a session with her a few years ago regarding personal branding. And that's something that's helped kind of perpetuate me on this journey that I'm on today. And I found we share a lot of the same DNA, branding, integrated marketing communications. We're both in-house leaders that recently left our institutions, have been acting as independent consultants. But we come through it from different doors. Because we're both co-leading, you're going to hear both vantage points, mine from alumni and donor engagement, Jaime's from institutional brand and enrollment. But together, we're going to sketch what we believe future-ready looks like for advancement MarCom, and then give you something that we've developed together, the 90-day blueprint, a clear, practical way to start your team's shift. Jaime, sorry to take the mic for so long, but please say hello. And I told you that I would put you on the spot, but I'd love for you to share with our audience why you said yes to doing this episode together.
Well, hey, Dan, I'm so thrilled to be here doing this episode. I said yes because I don't know how to say no. And my therapist is working on that. I'm just kidding, of course. Sort of, not kidding. Truly, that is actually happening in my life. But I said yes because the way you presented this to me was around the idea of busting the silos that exist between advancement and marketing. And I, as everybody who listens to my show knows, am super passionate about busting silos. And I think that if we're going to be successful in anything that we do in higher education, but especially in fundraising, we have to work better together. And I have seen so often that higher ed advancement offices kind of get like this, they're sort of separate from us. They're like an entity that we're not, connected with on the daily or that kind of thing. And I think that needs to change. I think we need to work better together. So I'm super excited for this conversation.
I've experienced that on the inside. I've been fortunate to have a really strong partnership as an advancement MarCom leader with my central MarCom division and other campus communicators. But I know that's not typically the norm. So getting at those silos are so critical for institutions, especially as the environment today becomes more and more challenging and everyone's looking at reducing unnecessary expenditures. How do we increase revenue? Are these organizational structures still the ones that serve us best? So I'd like to kick this off with a pulse check question. If you had to look at what advancement marketing communication might look like several years from now, so let's just say in 2028, how might you design that team, that structure, that work differently from the way that you've experienced it today?
Honestly, I would start with a shared journey map. And I see that as being essential to the work that we do in higher ed generally. And it's something I don't think we spend enough emphasis on, but actually having a map for an individual that takes them all the way from wherever, sophomore year of high school or wherever you start, middle school, kindergarten, and takes them all the way through their enrollment journey, to their current student journey, to their alumni journey, to their donor journey. with sort of that single message, that overarching brand message, kind of cradle to grave. And I would make sure that the marketing team has folks that are really, really focused on the alum/donor part of that messaging strategy. So like when I was at Winston-Salem State, we structured our team in something you could say like a pod, where people were assigned to different stages of that cradle to grave journey. So we had some of the people on the marketing side were paired up with enrollment people. Some of the people on the marketing side were paired up with people from the advancement side, and they were really focused on being subject matter experts on how to take marketing or how to market to alums and donors in a way that moves the needle on fundraising. So I think that model was really effective because it wasn't just these like one-off projects. It was projects tied to a strategic priority with people who were subject matter experts across both advancement and marketing. And I think it worked really, really well. The other thing I would say, having these sort of cross-functional teams also be leveraging AI to its full capacity. And everybody knows I'm really passionate about using artificial intelligence in our work. And I talk to so many teams that see it just as something that they can use to write copy or write thank you emails, but you could be using it for so many more sophisticated things. And I think that our colleagues that you and I both work with in advancement and in marketing really need to be leveraging it in more significant ways so that it is truly seen as a coworker almost that can take the work to the next level. But so that's what I would do. I would love to hear what's your first move in this situation.
Yeah, I would say I agree with many of those moves, but in keeping in line with the central theme of this Pulse Check series, I would say it's got to be shifting advancement MarCom or advancement comms teams from sort of a more classic role of being a reactive content producer for partners based on different types of requests versus actually having a more strategic role with a clear operating model. So that could look like each quarter you've got an overarching goal or objective and several key results that you're trying to achieve and drive against. Picking a couple of top narratives, stories, or even content streams that your team and in partnership with other teams. I love the idea about having cross-functional groups really aimed at tackling a shared goal, a shared project. And if requests come in that don't ladder up to or help move that sort of shared goal forward, then they wait, or maybe they get tackled through an alternative, whether it's freelancers or somebody else internally figures out how to do it. So protecting the focus of this team is really important. And then you're getting this group together on a recurring basis, whether that's weekly, biweekly, what have you, and actually holding everyone accountable for progress. So are we generating the results that we're looking for? If not, how do we refine the work that we're doing? Or maybe halt it, prune it, get rid of it. It's not working. Let's not be afraid to make that decision. So yeah, I'd say overall, there's a lot of different ways in which you can approach that work through shared journey maps, through structuring teams differently, absolutely, through the leveraging of artificial intelligence. But I think at its core, it's having a strategic focus to the function that is greater than being in a reactive role to other colleagues.
Oh, I 100% agree. And I loved what you said about pruning the things that maybe aren't moving the needle. I think we're really tied down in higher ed with the idea that we have to keep offering something that we've offered or keep doing something that we've been doing because maybe there's like one board member who really likes it. But I think that's really smart and really expands the capacity of the team. And I also love that your approach really emphasizes focus and strategic discipline. And I would love to talk about why the forces that make these moves urgent, if not at least worthy of consideration. And so thinking about sort of the drivers of change and what's going to happen over the next 3 to 5 years, I think there's the evolving donor expectations. They're really expecting personalized, transparent impact and stewardship that goes way beyond the gift. I think AI and integrated technology is going to allow for personalization at scale, faster insight cycles, but that's only if data and governance are shared. So we can't just have AI and tech providing this data and providing these insights if we're not sharing that insights across all the teams that can use it. And this is a challenge, not just in advancement, but also in enrollment. And it's something, if I can accomplish one thing in my career, it would be like, can we break down the silos between ownership of data, please?
Yeah. Yes, one CRM to rule them all. I know.
Exactly. I mean, I think this like one system thing, I have seen and talked to so many campuses that are like, oh, we have one CRM for everything but advancement. Like, that's like, come on, guys. Like, can we have something where we can see the whole life cycle? I would also add that there's a lot of pressure on ROI right now. Like, leaders really want fewer vanity metrics, and they want to be able to see more movement in the area of moving people through the pipeline and that depth of engagement, that it is really, truly engagement that is going to move the needle and isn't someone clicking the thumbs up button on LinkedIn or on Facebook or whatever, the heart on Instagram. And we think, yeah, that's like totally a valid form of engagement. Yeah, kinda. But does that mean somebody's going to make a donation at some point? So yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on what are some of the issues.
Yeah, I think you've hit on a number of those. It's certainly a trend for most schools that donor populations are increasingly including more non-alumni. So you have to keep in mind both that alumni journey as well as the non-alumni journey. At the center of that, we talk about in advancement how critical relationships are. Yet some of the challenges that you called out around data and our tools that manage that data and how we use that data to demonstrate that we know these people as individuals and not just sci-bunts or lie-bunts or whatever business term we want to attach to them for our purposes is something that we need to work on as an industry. But that's where in that partnership with central marketing communication, advancement marketing communication can be a leader in helping others to understand the profile, the behaviors, the psychographics, et cetera, of our alumni and donors more deeply. And then how do we connect it to the other types of opportunities that the institution continues to offer at large? How do we bring them back for convocation? How do we bring them back for commencement? What are those other obvious touch points for engagement that might not ultimately be leveraged as much as possible by a cross university group? So, yeah, there's a lot of pressures, and then you've got reduced funding on the outside. So, a lot of institutions right now are dealing with the federal government withholding research dollars and the impact of that, and not just on those particular areas of research, but the cascading impact on the financial stability of the institution. So I think we're going to continue to see the role of philanthropy and advancement divisions become even more important than they've already been. And so part of why I think this series is so helpful to those in this industry is getting them to understand that the way that we've done this work in advancement from a marketing, communication, and engagement standpoint is not the way that we need to be doing it moving forward.
Absolutely. If there's one thing I could change about higher ed, it would be this is the way we've always done it, being sort of a justification for continuing to do things that are outdated and not moving forward. I mean, I have seen people talk about, we're too busy to try to learn AI, or we're too busy to try to move to a new strategy or a new technique, or this has been backburnered because we're just focused on the immediate. And I think there's a lot of danger in that. If you are not constantly looking at the evolution of technologies, the changing trends, what donors are getting from the other places that they're giving money to, the other ways that they're being engaged by the places that they give to. If we just keep doing the same thing the way we've always done it, we're going to get the same results in a decline, right? Like it's not going to be this like, yep, we can just steadily hold steady. It's going to decline in effectiveness over time. And so I think you make a really good point about that need for evolution over the next 3 to 5 years.
What you've mentioned there in terms of donor expectations becoming much more sophisticated, right? I occasionally get a smoothie from Smoothie King. Smoothie King seems to know a lot more about me and my preferences and because of my behaviors, and they act on that data. And as institutions, you've got alumni who spend a lot of money, invest a lot to come to your school and want to continue to have a relationship and look for that. But in a lot of ways, we're not delivering. You know, we should be continuing to engage them. We shouldn't be forgetting to do that over time or doing it sporadically. So it's got to be a partnership there. And donors who are looking to invest in organizations that share their values, that they believe they can have an impact by supporting, schools need to become more sophisticated in demonstrating that they get who their alumni and donors are.
If you would indulge me, I'd love to give an example of how not to do it. My undergraduate alma mater only engages me when I get the phone call during the call-a-thon or whatever. The phone call from the student that's like, let me tell you all the reasons why you should give to the University of Minnesota. And in my most recent one of those calls, I raised, some concern about the fact that I had done some outreach to some different audiences on their campus, not heard anything back as an alum. That was really frustrating. And the person on the phone actually said, "Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. Will you have a good night?" And I felt very much like she had made a deduction that I probably wasn't going to give on that call. And so she just ended the call. She didn't continue to build the relationship. I thought, I'm not a multi-million-dollar donor, but I don't have children and I will have an estate. And it will be probably, hopefully, if I don't run out of money in a nursing home or something, fairly substantial. I kind of expected a phone call from someone that was like, "Hey, we want to talk about how to engage you more as an alum." Nothing. And I suspect that that's not the only institution that's their only touch point is that call-a-thon, and that their only touch point is that give us money letter, and that there's no attempt made to really understand the donor beyond that.
We're certainly calling out some major pain points, but the focus of doing this together was to illuminate a path forward. So there are, I think, 6 traits that you and I, Jamie, have identified that we believe demonstrate how teams can be built to be more successful moving forward. And I think this is a good segue into that first one, which is looking at life cycle or lifetime value orientation. In the business world, customer lifetime value is of course a critical business KPI that companies utilize in all shapes and forms. For institutions, how do we start to map shared journeys? We started communicating with you as a teenager when you were in high school, and then you decided to come here, and then you became a young alum, and you moved through different phases of your life. Maybe you got married and didn't have kids. Maybe you did have kids and they're in school. Maybe they're getting ready to go to college. There are all these different moments where that relationship can continue to unfold. And I think what institutions do well right now is kind of really zero in on those very specific engagements and say, well, you made a gift to our annual giving day last year, so we're going to communicate with you very specifically about that the next time we do our annual giving day. Or you're a prospect for planned giving, as you mentioned, and so we're going to communicate with you through just that planned giving outreach cultivation stream. So we tend to put these constituents into all these different little pockets, but then we never really look across and start to weave together these shared journeys to say, oh, well, this alum or this donor, this constituent looks like this, and they should be heading down this journey where we communicate and we engage with them and we invite them to these types of things, for example. And having multiple of these where you are truly showing that you get and you understand where that individual or couple or family or whatever unit is at. So I think life cycle and lifetime value orientation is the first? And I know you do a lot of work in the shared journey space, so I'm sure you have some good insights to share with our audience on that.
Yeah, I think the journey mapping is such a great idea. And we do spend a lot of time talking about it on the enrollment side, but I think it's very applicable to the alum and donor journey. And I think as you're building out a map, I really recommend starting out with, let's look at what moments are going to be of big significance, like you mentioned earlier in this conversation. But what are those moments when they're going to send somebody to college, when they have that first big career move, when they have, their first child graduates from college, when they are approaching a milestone age? A lot of times people want to be reflective and think about their past or think about their legacy at certain milestone ages. All of those sorts of things. It would be hard to get into all of them on this call, but all of those sorts of things. And then figure out what messaging and what path we need to put them on based on that. So if somebody graduated with a certain degree, maybe they have a degree in biology or a degree in journalism, is that journey path a little bit different than someone who graduated with a different major? Is that path a little bit different if they were a non-traditional student? What kind of messaging would resonate most with somebody who went back and finished their degree at 30 or at 35? What kind of messaging journey should they be on if they were a graduate student? Taking into account their interests based on their major, based on what we know about them. The tools are out there that tell us so much about where a person works, hobbies they have, all of these sorts of things. There shouldn't be a generic journey for someone. It should all be very personalized and very built around what we know about them. And I don't think there's a really good excuse for not doing that, because I think the power is there with the resources that we have to know things about people, and then the technology that allows us to take action on that. So I think delivering to donors content that is very tailored to who they are and not generic and doesn't look like something that every donor who gave at that level received. I think that can really set us up for feeling like we have a more personal relationship and make them feel like they're really special, right? That they're part of the institution, that we care about them as people. And so building out that journey map to me is just a really great first step for that.
Yeah, and I think just to take that a step further, when we look at how central MarCom and advancement MarCom teams can collaborate, that transition from student to young alum is so important. And if you can build a map, an engagement strategy that gets them engaged before they graduate and then immediately as a young alum, you've got a greater chance of having a deeper and longer relationship with those alumni. So perfect example for groups, there, if they wanted to spin off a cross-functional team just to map out and look at that area of engagement, huge opportunity. Our second trait is impact-driven measurement, right? So how do we get beyond maybe some of the more surface level types of marketing metrics to actually looking at some of the key business levers and business goals that we need to accomplish as an institution? So from your vantage point, what are some of the opportunities that you're seeing from a central MarCom standpoint become more important?
Yeah, I mean, my big thing would be to move away from open rates or click rates to really look at influence and depth of engagement, and then share those KPIs across the teams. I think if you don't have shared KPIs, then not everybody's going to be interested in accomplishing that KPI. So if advancement, for example, has as their KPI depth of engagement, but marketing is only concerned about open rates, I think that sets you up for failure. I think that it has to be a shared KPI. I think there has to be equal ownership of it. And I think it's really important to take away metrics that don't drive decisions. If it doesn't drive a decision, it shouldn't belong on the dashboard. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I agree. It's very easy just to pick the most obvious metrics that are in front of your face that a lot of times the technologies that we use present to you, but you got to take that a step further. I love the depth of engagement or depth of relationship. There's other ways that you could approach this, but Some very tactical ones in the advancement world would be, how many first-time donors do we have, and retention, donor retention, upgrades. One of the major initiatives that I helped our organization before I left do was reevaluate its leadership society, its primary leadership society, and as part of that, we increased the total annual giving threshold. But then we also infused it with more of a communication strategy with more perceived value. We introduced a lower level for young alumni who aren't able to give $2,500 or more dollars, a month, for example, but at a lower rate would still have access to those same types of benefits. So I think mapping those key business objectives goes a lot further than just the open rates and how many people registered for an event. Because then don't forget, you also have attrition. What was the actual show rate? But I would say, forget the show rate. What did those alumni go on to actually do? Or how are we using that data to, again, demonstrate that we know them and we're strategically engaging them or moving them across, some sort of strategic pipeline? So impact-driven measurement, trait number 2. Trait number 3 is audience-centric alignment. So the idea of sort of a shared messaging house where you've got different doorways, so to speak. You've got teams and people kind of coming in and out, but laddering up to a shared narrative. And one of the perfect and most impactful demonstrations of that from an advancement standpoint is standing up a comprehensive campaign. And sometimes that responsibility lies with a central marketing communication division, which, by the way, we know can also be called many different things at institutions, whether it's strategic communications or university relations or what have you. Sometimes it's a responsibility of advancement. And then in many cases, of course, it's shared. So developing a campaign or some type of major initiative where you've got a clearly identified audience and teams that are collaborating to move progress against that.
Yeah. And I would add making sure that all of that work really ladders up to the institutional brand and the institutional proof points, because you want that message to be amplified by the brand work that the marketing office is doing, right? So you have advancement sharing messaging that's cohesive with what the institution is sharing from a brand perspective. And that just helps make that feel like they're surrounded by messaging that is in alignment across the institution. And I love your point about the audience centricity. Like if it's not valid and relevant and engaging to the audience, it doesn't matter how well crafted it is from our side or how well we feel like it serves our needs. It needs to serve the audience's needs or it's not going to be effective. But that kind of segues me really nicely into talking about trait 3, which is integrated tech and AI. And as I mentioned earlier, huge, passionate advocate for using AI in all kinds of work. But I think for advancement teams, it can be used for personalizations. It can also be used to speed up the time it takes to create drafts. One of the things that I would encourage you to think about is how are you nudging people towards events, and how can you take, one piece of content in that nudge, or whether it's for an event or a gift, and expand that using AI into continued nudges, into follow-ups. It's really, really important to have a human in that process. I don't think we want to just turn this over to robots. There's enough issues with the content that gets generated. You don't want content that's obviously been generated by AI, but it can really speed up a lot of those things, and also can do things like help you kind of gut check open-ended surveys. It can really help with those qualitative surveys, help you can ask questions, analyze data, and then ask questions of it. So there's a lot you can do with AI. And I think it's going to be the teams that are going to set themselves apart are going to be the ones that implement that. I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, the first Advancement Amplified Pulse Check series focused on artificial intelligence for advancement, and so if you haven't checked that series out, be sure to go back and find that from Enrollify. There's so many different use cases for it. You've called out some really strong and obvious ones. So there's many tied to generative AI, and I'm starting to see advancement begin to explore that area more, whereas a year ago, it was still maybe more curiosity. And 2 or 3 years ago, it was what? Why is that relevant to me? So we're moving in the right direction. But you also are now seeing autonomous AI emerge with tools like version 2 AI and what they're doing with their virtual giving officers, and now also virtual stewardship officers, virtual engagement officers. So they've got a suite of autonomous AI tools now that can really do a lot of this work that historically would have taken a great number of FTEs, and they're allowing, used properly, the humans to have time freed up to focus on managing how those tools are used, but also B, other types of high value or higher value work, I should say. So to your point about getting to a draft of a stewardship letter or an impact story faster, you can spend more time maybe doing research or interviewing collaborators across campus, which is difficult for AI to do right now. So where do you pepper in the higher value human work? So yes, definitely integrated technology and AI. So moving on to our fourth is having more agile team structures. And jumping all the way back to sort of the beginning of this episode, where we talked about the external pressures that institutions are having to grapple with, and then the internal pressures that those create on financials and head counts and resources. What I'm seeing in the advancement space is a really hard and fast tightening up of adding any headcount. And if you're not actually reducing headcount, you're certainly figuring out how to optimize what you have. So jumping back real quick to technology and AI, that is a great way to get more done with fewer people. But I also think there's an opportunity to structure teams differently. Maybe having interim or fractional roles where you don't have to pay for a full-time salary, and you don't have to pay for all the fringe benefits on top of that, which depending on what state you live in, can be in California, it's well over 40% of somebody's salary. So you're talking about a really potentially strong way to add capabilities and experience without the full cost of having to add that FTE, right? So there are different ways to do that, building experienced freelancer stables, whether those are writers or designers or video. There's a lot of talent out there, and unfortunately there's a lot of talent being let go by institutions. So if you've got a strong network and you know how to build relationships with those people, you can add tremendous value to your organization by tapping into people on the outside doing that kind of work.
Here's a quick word from our sponsor. Southeast Missouri State University needed to launch more targeted campaigns faster, yet they were bogged down by manual campaign builds, slow approvals, and vendor overload. With Element 451, they eliminated 5 vendor tools and gained marketing superpowers in one platform. They saw a 13% increase in applications, processed applications within 2 days, and achieved 33 to 35% email open rates. The impact: personalized, automated campaigns running at scale without the drag. Ready to turn your next campaign around in hours, not weeks? Try an agent today at element451.com/agents.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, some of the strongest leaders in terms of developing strategy end up being vice presidents or AVPs or whatever. And then all of their time suddenly gets sucked up with going to meetings and managing HR issues and budget issues. And they're not necessarily able to do some of that deep strategy work. And so bringing in somebody from the outside that can help with that, I think, is fabulous. I also think, earlier we talked a little bit about that integration between advancement and marketing. And I think if this is going to be really effective, and if we're really going to talk about busting silos, those teams need to work as one. It can't be, this is our part of the project and that's your part of the project. It needs to be, we're working together towards a common goal. We're all in this together. The accomplishment of this goal has shared accountability. And so I think having that idea of, for certain projects, certain high priority things, I don't want to say it's like you're lending someone to the other person on the team, but they do need to be truly part of that team and part of the accountability matrix for that team. And I think when you have that, and when you get rid of this sort of ticket mindset where it's like, hey, I'm going to put in a ticket for you to create some piece of material for me, and instead have it truly be like, hey, let's get together and brainstorm together. We have this problem, this challenge, this goal. How can marketing support that in a high level way, and then let the marketers use their marketing expertise to build out a strategy that can help solve that advancement problem. And I think that can actually lead to much more effective work and much more effective relationships.
Jamie, you probably experienced this on the inside and working clients through change management right now, but there's transformational moments, whether it's the development of a new strategic plan and how to implement it, or it is gearing up for a comprehensive campaign. There are impetuses along that journey of an institution where these types of opportunities to rethink and relook at team structure present itself. And I would recommend, if now is not the right time, you still have a vision for what that looks like. Okay, we've got 6 FTEs right now. In a perfect world, we'd have 8, and that's how we'd be structured. But it might take a year or 2 before we could potentially make the business case to unlock role number 7, or we use these technologies or these freelancers to cover those gaps for now. So even if you aren't about to enter or working your way through one of those transformative moments, it could be an academic restructuring where you've got teams kind of collapsing within each other, right? That you at least have a vision for what you want that to look like and how it would work. Because if you don't, somebody else is going to come along and have that vision for you, and it might not work out in your favor.
Absolutely. I mean, you don't want to be having a vision that isn't based on the reality of your situation and what you think is going to move the needle. You don't want to have a vision not defined by that forced upon you. I mean, you want to be able to, if somebody pulls you into a room and says, what can we do structurally to fix some of the challenges that you're having and to move the organization forward, you want to be able to have in your back pocket an answer to that question.
Absolutely. I'm hearing and seeing that question asked more from advancement leaders. I had an opportunity to attend the Case Summit for Leaders earlier this summer, and these are the kinds of questions that they're weighing, right? And when they're ready to ask that question, oftentimes they don't want to wait a whole lot of, long time for that answer. They want to make a decision, and then they want to move on that decision and, do it in the most responsible, ethical way. But senior leaders they're ready for change. And, when they ask you to enter that room and have that conversation, you want to be prepared. All right. And that leads us to our final and 6th trait, which is embedding innovation into the culture of your team.
This is one of my passions. This is something I travel around and talk to teams about. Innovation is, I think, essential right now. It's something that we need to have as a key priority, that we are focused on doing things in new ways, bringing new ideas to the table. And for that to happen, there's a couple things you need. You need to have psychological safety where people feel comfortable developing sort of outside the box ideas, and also where people feel really comfortable with, if this doesn't work, we're going to take what we learned from that and apply that to something new, but we're not going to play the blame game. So in order to really have an innovative culture, you have to have that. And a good way to sort of baby step, and I'm putting that in air quotes, toward this is running these smaller scale pilots that give you a chance to try something, iterate, try, fail, learn, explore, and then scale it up based on everything that you learn. So I teach people a lot about how to prototype. So have these big what if ideas. What if we did this? What if we did that? And then really start to drill down, what do we need to be able to accomplish those things? What kind of time frame, what resources, what partners do we need to have across the institution? And then how do we prototype this into something that scales? And having that mentality, I think, is going to be a big differentiator because it's not hard, but it's also not easy. It's something that requires a lot of intentionality. What are your thoughts around that?
You can't just set it and forget it. The landscape right now is so dynamic. You might have a plan in place, and then here comes some major thing that happens totally outside your university's control, and now you're grappling with issues management or crisis communications, right? But having areas identified that you want to innovate against, whether that's part of your team's annual planning process or something you look at quarterly, to your point about taking small strides. Success begets more success. And sometimes I think when you try to look at, if we can't do it all, it's not worth doing is not the right approach, because then you'll never start, right? So find those examples where through maybe low investment but high return, you have an opportunity to demonstrate either whether it's to just your own team or to your partners or to maybe your senior leaders that there is a better way to do the kind of work that you've historically been doing. But I would say all of these traits that we've shared regarding future ready teams have a critical dependency on something at the center. And I know that this is a topic near and dear to both of us, which is silo busting, right? You've got to start to tear down the silos between divisions, or even if we're talking about, within advancement or within central MarCom, you've got those, additional layers and silos. But to me, beginning that process of stronger collaboration and more integration has to be a non-negotiable as we look at creating higher performing teams over the next couple of years. So understanding each other's area of responsibility and work better, having systems in place, having processes that reduce friction when you need to have people come in and out on projects, efficiencies and how you budget. And really, I think you mentioned this a couple minutes ago, but sharing the accountability for success.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I am so convinced that integration is the essential way forward, because from the marketing perspective, you should embrace this, right? Because you are we're telling one brand story across all audiences, right? It's taking your brand messaging, your brand platform, and amplifying it with another audience. From the advancement perspective, you're getting the support of a team that is also doing brand work, that's also understanding the audience from the very first stages of their engagement with the institution. And we mentioned this a couple of times, having those shared KPIs. You can't have one be vanity metrics and the other be something completely different. Everybody needs to be aligned. What is the ultimate goal? And are you moving the needle toward that goal in everything that you're doing? Having one data source, having AI that scales, those sort of pods of people that work together. I really liked the model where we had folks that if it is an advancement project, this is the writer from our team that's going to be working on it because they deeply understand the advancement model. This is the designer because she deeply understands, the unique brand identity of the giving. And doing some cross-team pilots of those innovations that we're talking about. I think getting folks to the table to discuss what are some ways that we could do things in a new and interesting way, and then having both teams be involved in those innovative activities. And then truly that connected journey. Not every donor is going to be an alum, but donors should have connected journeys from the time they first engage with the institution until, they make their planned gift. And having that be something, that journey should be as well understood by the marketing office as the student journey is.
I'm going to riff off a couple of examples that I think are great opportunities for maybe piloting these types of cross-functional teams. Comprehensive campaigns, campaign planning, right? Having sort of a campaign communications task force where you've got representation from different areas of the university. Strategic plan work. So oftentimes there are marketing and communications or brand specific strategic initiatives that are identified. even down to the level of having a shared digital asset management system. So you've got all these different areas of a university investing ongoingly into photo shoots and asset collection. But what if you introduced a system that could create cost efficiencies where you're having to shoot less and share more, and over time, really enabling the work of marketing communication professionals better. So I think there are a lot of different, from sort of lower level to higher level, higher value opportunities where these teams can be employed. And I'd say specifically with in advancement, there are many areas that advancement teams can come together and look at that work, whether it is reevaluating the giving societies that you have, or it's looking at that young alumni engagement and how do we bolster that because we know the value of it, or how do we take what gift planning is doing and their cyclical cultivation and communications work and start to build that into alumni events. So we're being more strategic about the people that we invite, in the right people in the right locations, for the right kind of programming. Lots of opportunity, but it has to be, I believe, a leadership backed endeavor, because you're going to have to draft people from different teams and charge them with a shared goal, shared responsibility. And you really need your senior leadership involved in helping identify what those strategic goals and shared responsibilities are going to be, and then pulling together the people, identifying who they are, and giving them their charges. So I'm starting to see that become a little bit more of I'd say an experimentative approach, but I think it really needs to start to become more of the norm in advancement moving forward.
Absolutely. And there's some things that leaders can do to make this happen. I think there's a big mindset shift that needs to happen. So instead of having intake forms, for example, with your advancement team on the marketing side, replace those intake forms with goal-based conversations. I'm a big believer in and lived in this reality where our intake form was literally name, email, what's your goal? And we're going to start a conversation based on that. And I think that gets us past we need a brochure and we need a social media post. Let the advancement team focus on how to fundraise, and let the marketing team focus on how to get that fundraising material out and be effective. I also think having that sort of quarterly KPI review where, again, you're looking at them together. Don't make this a once a year thing. Don't make this an annual endeavor. This needs to be something that you're having at least quarterly, where you have one dashboard, one narrative, and you're making joint decisions about how to act on that. And then finally, I would say, I have talked to a lot of folks that have, for every single project that comes in, they have a separate project brief for that project. I think a better move is to have a overarching revenue generation project brief or an overarching campaign project brief, and then tie in these other pieces that come up throughout the year into that. And that makes it feel less like we're restarting the wheel every time. It makes it feel like it's more of an integrated, concentrated effort that can be multi-year and really is working towards that larger fundraising goal or that larger engagement goal, depending on what the audience is. So I think there's a lot of things that as a leader you can start doing, even if you're not necessarily the top leader either. Like, you can start having some of these conversations with your colleagues across the office. But at the end of the day, silos don't fall by accident. They fall when goals, data, and decisions are shared. And it's just essential that we think about that.
Nothing pains advancement colleagues more than having to fill out a detailed project brief or request form. So I do think the more standardized, but also more relationship focused you can make that dialogue, the better, especially on the development side. So I can understand on the alumni engagement side where there are specific events and opportunities where details matter, right? You got to collect a lot of those specific details, information to build a effective digital marketing plan and write accurate copy and target the right audiences and so forth. On the development side, there should be a lot more conversations, I believe. To your point about name, focus, 2 or 3 things, keep it simple, and then schedule a meeting to talk about that opportunity.
Yeah.
And do it earlier so it can be more of a strategic partnership as opposed to, you're this service provider, I am requesting this thing of you to do.
Yes.
And then you feel you don't have as much agency over your expertise and what you might bring to the table in terms of your thinking and ideas. So busting those silos is essential to this. And then I would say, as you continue to work on that, right, it's never going to be, hey, we did it and it's done and we don't ever need to do it again. You need to stay on top of making sure that those silos don't creep up, which is having a plan for creating this type of strategic shift, and not having it be an overly complicated multi-year plan, right? So we've put together some thinking on what we're calling the 90-day blueprint, which is based on the types of changes we've been talking about today and those opportunities and the positive impacts that they can have on your team, on your division, your institution. We've got 4 different areas that we want to call attention to that can help you to jumpstart this positive type of shift. The first is doing strategic assessment work. So if we're carving up about a 3-month period, in your first several weeks, let's say weeks 1, 2, 3, you should be really focusing on understanding your work better. And Jaime, I'm going to pause there and hand that off to you to take a little further.
Yeah. I mean, I think you cannot go forward without understanding where you are today. I'm a big believer in that. And so what you have to start by doing is really looking at the strategy, the structure, the skill sets that you have on the team, the systems that you have and how they work together, and then the story that you're telling. So really auditing that, doing a deep dive on that. Run some stakeholder micro interviews to kind of surface any alignment gaps that might exist across the team. I think in order to measure if you're moving forward, you have to capture what's the baseline. Where are we measuring up now? And then developing that sort of 1-page strategy map. I think I talk a lot about the marketing maturity model. I think you could have an advancement maturity model or an advancement and marketing working together maturity model, but it really maps where you are today, what the goals are, what your audiences are, what those proof points are, what channels you're going to use, what are the top 5 most urgent gaps, and then how do you move from there?
Yeah, and I love in particular those interviews, because a lot of times what you see when you look in the mirror as a leader or an individual contributor or as a team is not what your colleagues see. And so really kind of getting into those blind spots and doing so from a standpoint of just be earnestly wanting to improve. We're not trying to call out anyone's in particular individual weaknesses, but we want to improve as a team, and this is one way to do it. And your mention of AI maturity, I know that's an area that's of course become increasingly important, and AI adoption, AI readiness. To me, that's sort of an obvious next step. So once you've completed the assessment work that you outlined, and you've got a roadmap for positive, impactful change, starting to explore AI in a more strategic and focused way. Jaime?
I've built out this AI maturity matrix. It's available on my website if you want to download a copy of it. It's free. But it really evaluates where you are in about 6 different categories. And honestly, the technology is the last category. You really need to have a vision. You need to have some governance. So I think having an AI use policy, what are the allowed use cases? Where do humans intervene? When do you disclose it? How are you handling data, et cetera, et cetera? I think that's really important. I think having that collaboration sort of defined, what does collaboration around AI projects look like? How are we going to work together? I really recommend starting with one really low risk, high ROI pilot, and that maybe it's something like donor segment insights or first draft stewardship emails or whatever. Start with something like that, pilot it, learn, make sure you're setting what are the KPIs for this. and then going back and evaluating it. I think getting some training tools available. One of my clients is building out a place where people are sharing their insights on different tools. So if you're like, I want to try this tactic and use AI for this tactic or for this part of the work that I do, I can go and look and see, oh, this person tried this tool and with this prompt and it wasn't effective. What can I learn from that? And then I think at the end of that, once you sort of establish, here we are on that maturity journey, and here's a pilot that we've tried and what we've learned for it, what can we then decide to scale for our future use cases? And so I think if you do that really quickly, if you set aside 3 or 4 weeks on that, that will get you on a path toward much improved integration of AI and tech.
Yeah, I love your idea about creating a space for teammates and colleagues to share. Right, a lot of advancement divisions have intranets where there's all kinds of resources and serves as sort of a knowledge hub. But it's also the easiest place for that same resource not to be found. So whether you've got an active area on Microsoft Teams or a Slack channel where you can have people in real time sharing their sort of individual or team explorations and learning from it, it just creates a lively environment. And going back to fostering that culture of innovation, where people want to do more of it. It's like, oh, wow, I figured out I can do this. Now let me try and take it a step further and see if I can, get it to do this thing for me. So make it as easy as possible. I think, and I shouldn't say I think, I understand the institutional perspective and needing to be sensitive to sharing people's data, people's information, in manners you don't want. But at the same time, I think higher ed has a tendency to, with those policies, we've got to define it all, and it's got to be much more restrictive than it is, encouraging exploration. And I would say a lot of value in there, but maybe don't make it as restrictive. Have it be from a position of encouragement, because I think when people see all the ways which you're not allowed to use it, it creates the fear of, well, I don't want to use it in the wrong way, and I don't want to do something that I could ultimately get in trouble for. Or, you know what, I'm going to do it on the side anyway, even though it's telling me I'm not allowed to do it. But right. and then you've got a lot of people going rogue who are maybe doing something in a way which they shouldn't be, but at the same time should be, but don't feel like it's a safe environment for them to be doing that work. Yeah. So again, I know there's a tendency to want to draft off of an institutional policy and have it be more restrictive, but make sure you're balancing that.
Absolutely. Set those guardrails, no personally identifiable information or, whatever. Some of these are common sense, but set those guardrails and then give a lot of freedom within those guardrails.
Our third component to this 90-day blueprint is going back to life cycle value and shared journeys, is finding an opportunity to do an integrative journey. So where are you going to get that lift? Where's the impact? Going back to one of the examples that we've mentioned a few times in this episode, which is taking that graduating student to young alum, or it could be the admitted student, and tracking them all the way through becoming a new alum, if you want to go back a little bit further to when they're a prospective student. And then to the way that the first alumni event they attend, or the first gift they make as now a donor of the institution, and what's the continued cultivation strategy for them? Is it to try to get them to be a member of a young alum, a recent alum giving society? Because if they give X amount of times in the first several years of being alum, that they're likely to continue to give at high rates moving forward. And then as they become more mature and have go through some of those life cycles we've mentioned and are thinking about estate planning, that their institution is in the consideration set for that, right? So pick a mini map, bring in the owners that share different elements of that, and collaborate on some KPIs that we're trying to drive against.
Yeah. I mean, and I think enrollment should be at the table in this conversation too, because the future alumni start out as prospective students. And so I think if you're having this conversation and building this mini map, don't have it just be advancement and marketing people. I would encourage you to also include enrollment or admissions folks in that conversation as well.
Our fourth area, so once you've worked through the first, let's say, 2 months of assessment, AI maturity, identifying a couple pilot opportunities with AI tools, and then a life cycle opportunity, start to document how you want to communicate the progress being made. So how do you make that visible to leadership? And if we're talking about collaborating across silos with different divisions, you need to be cognizant of a shared dashboard, if you will, so that the senior leaders of several different groups are going to be able to understand what it is we're trying to do here. So capture the results that matter, and then know how to frame and tell that story internally. All right, we've made this investment in doing this work a different way. So what? What do you want to happen next with that? Do you want it to unlock a bigger cross-functional opportunity for your work, for the institution? What's on the horizon for that? So step 4 is having a game plan for what to do after you've embarked on this journey. So months 3 to 6, what are those strategic initiatives? What are those teams? What are those further journeys? And continue to report out to leadership on that work. Jaime, what would you add to that?
I would add to make sure that you are celebrating those wins with the team too, because you're shifting the way they work. There will likely be anxiety when they start out with this change in approach, right? There'll be some anxiety. I think, let's say you've implemented this like one project brief, this intake form that isn't filling out this long thing. There'll be some anxiety on both sides about that. From experience, the advancement side may feel like they're losing a little autonomy. They want to be able to direct what that work is. The marketing team is going to feel like we're doing things in a new way, and there's going to be, some tension, right? And I think tension can be good, but I think celebrating those wins and saying, look, we made it through this pilot, or we made it through the initial stages of this. We're learning from this. We're going to grow, but hooray for us. Was fantastic. So definitely celebrate that story internally with your teams as well, and celebrate it together. This isn't just this is a really good time to showcase that we are one team working towards a shared goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in case, I don't know that we said it explicitly, but I will now, which is you don't need to do all of this at once, right? You don't need to flip the switch and convert all of your systems and all the ways that you approach 100% of your work at one time. So you're using the classic 80-20 or really 20-80 principle. Maybe you pick 20% of the work that you want to pilot to do differently. And if that goes well, great. Then you expand it and you do more that way. It's a learning opportunity where you can make adjustments and fine tune, maybe swap in other people who have different kinds of skill sets as others swap out. If this is going to be kind of a longer term commitment, you don't want to burn people out. So having a plan for the plan, so to speak, is important as well. So we've covered a tremendous amount, I think, of ground in identifying some of the key pressures out there, what future ready teams look like, the strategic significance of breaking down those silos, and then having a plan, whether it's 90 days or 60 days, 120 days, having a plan to start to move down this path of shifting from reactive to proactive strategic partner and driver of impact. So we've talked about agility, integration, AI. Is there anything that you want to loop back to just to emphasize one more time?
I just really want to do a +1 to myself for having that one story across the whole journey, having those shared KPIs, having some agility in how you work together, and then having that culture of psychological safety that allows you to truly innovate and then scale that innovation. I just think that that's going to move the needle so much for so many institutions.
Well, this issue, as we mentioned at the start, if you've stuck with us for the hour plus now, is going to be published on both the Pulse Check, the IA MarCom Shift, as well as Jaime's show, Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO. So we want to get this message out there to the widest audience possible, whether you are a member of a central MarCom team, an advancement MarCom team, a school, college, other administrative unit communicator. It's so important, I think, the lessons that we're sharing here today. So if you listen to this and want to reach out to either of us to talk about these topics further, please do. We really believe strongly that advancement MarCom teams and the collaborations that they have are so critical for setting institutions up for the success that they need to experience over the next couple of years. We've got Dan and Jamie signing off here.
And let's go bust some silos.
Make your work matter. Thanks for joining us. Take care.
The Higher Ed Pulse is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our show helps higher ed marketers and admission pros find their next big idea and features a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Brian Gross, Eddie Francis, Jenny Lee Fowler, and so many of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.